it's important to keep adapting. Look, if Grinling Gibbons, the famous Baroque woodcarver, could have a CNC machine, and he was a very good businessman, he'd have been all over that. So there's no way that he would have not done that.
Welcome back to Artfully Crafted. My name is Alienor, and each week I travel to a craft person's studio, interview them and show you their work. This week we're going to Holborn to meet Clunie Fretton. She's a master carver, a QEST scholar, and has worked on really prestigious commissions up and down the UK. Hi Clunie, thank you so much for having me in your studio.
It's a pleasure.
We're in Cockpits in Bloomsbury. Do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about Cockpits as a way to begin?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cockpits, a charitable organisation that provides studio space and business support just for craftspeople. So it's pretty rare in the UK, and especially rare in London, to find a studio space in the middle and be very connected. But they provide fantastic support to people how to run businesses and make it successful, because I think craftspeople don't always get trained in that.
Yeah.
You come for the passion, and then you have to work out the tax returns later.
Yeah, and then you realise, I've got to do my own marketing, my own this, my own that.
Absolutely.
One-man band for all the business aspects.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about the materials that you work in? So you're a woodcarver by training, but you work in a range of materials, right?
I trained as a woodcarver, ornamental woodcarver in the kind of historic style. So that's very traditional training, and you do a lot of measured carving from existing casts, so you know how to copy something exactly if you need to do restoration work. But obviously those skills feed into general sculptural practice. If you're able to see something in 3 dimensions in timber, you can do it in stone or clay or bronze or plaster. So it really depends. Most of my work is in wood, but often if a client comes along and they want something specific in bronze, it's very easy. I have all of those skills from my carving practice to transfer into another material.
Okay, and I'm guessing as well that you have a background in draughtsmanship as well?
Yeah, that was a really big component of the course. So you're trained to, in the past, before we had photography or 3D scanning and things like that, if you wanted to make a copy of an object that you couldn't take with you to the workshop and actually take measurements of, you would draw it by hand, and you would be doing very technical observational drawing. So the idea was that you should be able to make a drawing that you could then work from it back in the studio, and it would have all of the detail about the depth of different carvings and different elements in it, and a good idea of the measurements as well. So this doesn't always form so much of the kind of carving practice now for most carvers. Some carvers still draw a lot, and I still draw if I'm presenting ideas to the client, but it's nice to have that foundation to fall back on, basically.
Right, so I guess it's kind of like a mock-up, so you can sort of go back and forth and sort of narrow down on the design that they want, right?
Absolutely, and the more time you spend drawing something, the more you get to know the object. They can make changes at the drawing and the clay model stage, but as soon as you start carving, it becomes much more difficult to make changes. So if you want to make sure that they're very happy with it before you go into that more expensive material, and a material where it's difficult to change stuff later on.
Yeah, fair enough.
If it's a really big, complicated carving, really high relief or in the round, you would want to make a model so that you're making the mistakes in that material and you're getting everything just so before you carve it. Because obviously if you carve it in stone or wood, then that's that. You can't, it's not easy to fix mistakes in those materials. But if it was a really simple carving, then sometimes you can just draw directly onto the wood and you can carve that away, just because you have the experience of knowing what heights things should be and what depth. But it's always safer to make a model, especially if someone's starting out training. It's not wasted time to do that. It's time when you're learning and experimenting with things.
What sort of scale of projects have you done? Because we've got some example behind us that are sort of smaller things, but have you done some projects that have been, you know, very big in size? Well, I would imagine actually the difference between the size of a maquette and the project is quite
big. I think the biggest one was a large-scale bronze eagle that was sort of the brief was to make something that was halfway between a heraldic eagle, which was they're quite stylized animals, and halfway between naturalism. So it was quite an interesting commission, but that was wall to wall in here, so they had maybe 50 mil clearance to turn it round.
Oh my God.
That was exciting. Like, it was big enough to ride.
Wow. Yeah. How long did that take you to work on?
It took a good number of months, but it was, because that was destined to be cast in bronze, the process, you know, my process would, you know, is usually for things to leave the studio finished. So there's an additional period of time afterwards where it goes to the foundry and is cast. You know, they make a mould of it, and then they cast the wax, and then they take that and they make another shell around that, lost wax casting, and then it's cast in bronze and reassembled out of many pieces. So.
Right. And because I know, so for example, at the workshop where I used to work at, we once did a project where it was going to be, we were carving in plaster, but then we were going to it was going to be cast with resin behind glass. And obviously the resin, like, you know, shows things and a level of detail that you maybe don't notice as much with the plaster. It's a bit more forgiving. Did you have to take any of that into account when you were sort of going from wood to bronze? Like, are those materials, do they come across in a very different way? Or
so this project I actually carved in plaster, just because it made it much easier to build it up, and it was much quicker. So if we needed to make fast changes, it was easier to like cut bits off, and you could stick bits back on. I mean, plaster doesn't always like to stick to itself, so you have to work in a particular way, but actually carving plaster is a little bit like carving wood but with no grain, so it's very satisfying. And actually the finish from that, obviously it was white, so the finished bronze was in a verdigris, a kind of green colour, but you could sort of get a sense of what detail it was going to pick up, which is nice. Whereas yes, if it had been in wood, then you would have the depending on the timber, you would have a very wood-like quality. You'd see the grain and things like that, which can be an asset or can detract from a sculpture.
Depending on what you want. And so who are your clients typically?
It's a real mix. So we do quite a bit of ecclesiastical work, so sometimes for churches or cathedrals, so that tends to be restoration or gilding work, sometimes making new furniture, so like fonts or font covers, things like that. Otherwise, sometimes furniture designers, sometimes architects, or sometimes just directly with clients. So heraldic work is typically directly to a client. So they'll have a coat of arms already, or they'll have just received a coat of arms from the College of Arms, and they want to have a big one carved in wood or stone. So my partner's a stone carver, so he'll do the stone side.
Nice.
But yeah, real mix. It keeps it interesting.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think you had a project, didn't you? That was a coat of arms project that you said was quite a nice one to talk about.
Yeah.
Do you want to say a little bit about that project?
Yeah, of course. So this was probably the biggest coat of arms I've done, and it was a royal coat of arms for a client who had bought a building that was originally owned by George III. It was an observatory, so he wanted to have a George III coat of arms. So each king has a different coat of arms, and George III actually had 3 during his lifetime, I think.
Oh, wow.
So when the building was built, it was during the period for his first coat of arms. So the blazon changes, and the blazon, I mean, for people who don't know, like, the blazon is the written description that tells you exactly what components go in the coat of arms.
Right.
So traditionally, a heraldic artist doesn't get an image to copy, they get given a very specific, kind of quite old-fashioned written description, and they interpret all of those elements in their own artistic style. So the George III coat of arms was really nice. Obviously, it looked very grand, with like lion and unicorn and all of these kind of wonderful symbols. So I got to make some really nice kind of quite bombastic carving, which you don't often get the chance to do.
Yeah, that sounds like a really special project.
Yeah, it was lovely to do. And also with heraldry, with the bigger coats of arms where you have supporters, the animals on them, it's a really nice chance to put in a lot more sculptural work into wood carving, because quite often wood carving, unless you're carving religious statuary, something like that, you don't have typically lots of sculptural work. So being able to carve animals is quite a nice,
Quite expressive.
I get to kind of stretch a little bit and enjoy doing some less typical work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shall we take it back to sort of the roots of your
Yeah.
passion?
Yeah.
Where did it all began?
Where did it all begin?
Yeah.
So I actually read a book when I was young that had a woodcarver in it and really loved it. And I asked my dad to get me some carving tools, and he very sweetly got me some balsa wood and scalpels. And I was like a little bit disappointed. I was thinking it would be the mallet and chisel. So
How old were you then?
maybe 7 or 8. So it didn't take
so
off
sweet.
then. It didn't take off then.
Yeah, I can see why he didn't get you the chisel
Yeah.
and
I know.
at that age.
Yeah, but it wasn't quite like, it didn't quite have the excitement that I was hoping for.
Fair.
So, and we didn't have anywhere for me to work anyway. But I didn't think about carving until quite a lot later, and I'd always been interested in art, but I was particularly interested in drawing and draftsmanship and drawing in a traditional way. And I'd looked at a number of courses when I was younger at all the kind of typical art colleges, and most of them don't teach traditional drawing anymore. So it was more draw what you feel and not draw what's actually in front of you. So yeah, I don't know. Look, Picasso was a fantastic draftsman before he became abstract, and I think you have to have that foundation in order to do exciting things with your work. If you want to kind of break boundaries, you have to know where the boundaries are to start. So I found a course in South London called City and Guilds of London Art School, and they teach a full-time stone or wood carving course. And I think they're the only one in the country who does it still. It's very rare to have a full-time course.
Yeah.
But part of that really drew me to it was this big drawing component. So really strong traditions in drawing and getting very technical and spending a long time on the drawings.
I think that's very... what you were saying about draftsmanship being so key. I think you're right. You've got to really master something before you can then turn it into whatever you want. And in a way, you would be limited as an artist or as a maker if you didn't have that like strong base. Yeah, and
although I'd always drawn, I was very conscious that I didn't have the skills to do it confidently professionally, and I didn't feel like it was. I wouldn't have felt happy doing work at that level, knowing that I could be, a lot more capable. So it was either that or a concept art course, because that's the other, the kind of divergence in the paths. Concept artists have to draw very fast, very accurately, and very attractively. So they have to sell the concept to clients and to filmmakers and producers of video games. So both have the same sort of skills, but obviously quite divergent from like the very historic to the very modern.
Yeah.
But I went the historic route in the end.
Fair. Yeah. And so what was the structure of the course? Do you want to say a little bit about that? So a big component of drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a 3-year-long course. And the first year they include a lot of modelling in clay, a lot of drawing, and a bit of carving and a bit of lettering. But the focus is very much on building the kind of foundational skills and ability to see, actually. And I know this is sort of sounds like an odd thing to say, but unless you can interpret an object in 3 dimensions, and this can be through drawing or through modelling or through carving, they all feed into the same thing. So a kind of sculptural ability to determine whether something looks nice, or if a curve is going around a corner, is it a nice curve or is it kind of floppy? It's got to have some spring in it. So the ability to see those things feeds into lettering, it feeds into sculpture, it feeds into all parts of this kind of practice. And that was very similar with stone and wood. So although the materials are quite different, the base training is very similar. And as the course progresses, you do more and more carving and less modelling and drawing. But the modelling and drawing comes in as a component of the projects you're making, basically.
And so where did you go from there? From City and Guilds, did you move into a studio right away, or what was the sort of... Because I'd love to delve a little bit into what it's like to actually go from like, okay, I'm a student, I've got the skills, but obviously it's a very different step to then be someone in an established practice, right? So with a client base, with a studio, etc. So what was that process for you?
Well, it was really scary. I think I was lucky in that I ended up staying on as the carving fellow that year. So they used to run a scheme where one student would stay on for a 4th year, and they would pursue their own projects, have a bit of studio space, and also engage with the students who are currently practicing and be available for kind of
mentoring?
More informal help. So out of hours, I would usually work very late. So I would be there if students wanted to, have some advice on something. During that fellowship year, I also worked for a company called Carvers Gilders, who do fantastic restoration work. And that was really interesting and really useful to get an insight into professional practice and to learn additional skills, because the gilding component was part of college, but it was a very small, I think we maybe got a week of training, all told. So it was it's good to kind of build on those skills you've got in college and to realise that the pace that you work in college is not an acceptable pace in a professional workshop.
That hourly rate at the back of your head is very different.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to try and find other people to work for after you've left, because it's very difficult to set up, because traditionally you would have apprenticed for 7 years, so you would have apprenticed in a professional workshop, not a very different setting to one where you're being educated maybe more in the kind of art practice and sculptural side of things. So you would come out with a very clear idea of what a professional workshop looked like, what skills you needed to have, what deadlines and speeds you were supposed to work to. So you have...
And by the time you've done the 7 years, you're probably at the speed you need to be at anyway, right? Because you've had that extra time to develop as a craftsman.
Yeah, and you might not have necessarily some of the room to grow into sculptural ideas that you would as part of a college course. But I think because we now only really have training through colleges rather than apprenticeships are very rare in carving nowadays. Yeah. So I think that's fine. They bring their own kind of differences, but I think it's very important leaving to be aware that there are places where you're not going to be up to speed because you've spent additional time learning other skills. Yeah. So that was really formative, I think, and very helpful to see. And so after that, I was lucky enough to continue getting work and work by word of mouth, and obviously trying to find studio spaces is complicated.
Yeah, but you had that nice sort of transition with the fellowship and working with Carvers and Gilders.
Exactly, and I think that helps as well in just feeling confident enough that you can do the job, and you can do the job on time, and you know how to deal with clients, and you've seen how other people deal with clients, which is really understated skill, but it's very
That's a whole
important.
Different ball game.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think unfortunately in most courses, whatever it is, whether you're going to do a fashion degree or whatever, there's not a huge emphasis on business skills because they don't have the time in that course. But I think that's the other side of it. So this is the thing that Cockpit does here, is that helps people develop those skills. But I think it's nice to see it in practice.
Yeah.
So if you trained as a joiner or a cabinet maker, you would see that happening. You see how people deal with clients in the workshop. You'd see how things progress or dealing with suppliers. And I think because there are very few dedicated carving workshops rather than just restoration or things like that, we don't have the same opportunities really to learn some of those skills. So where you can find it, it's good to take it.
Well, especially because I imagine with the sorts of commissions that you're working on, you're either working for sort of heritage brand or institution, or you're working with a rather wealthy client, right? Because these are likely going to be the two types of clients that can afford your work, right? And so straight away it's people who are expecting a certain level of service.
Even if somebody is commissioning you to do a small job, you need to be able to engage with them in a way that's professional and on time, and you answer emails, and that's very difficult to do, I think, when you're working with your hands, and the time that you're not working with your hands, you're not making the money essentially. So there's that sort of push and pull between the two.
Yeah, shall we talk more about that sort of that tension between but I think that's the thing that every craftsperson I speak to really struggles with, is okay, and that's a point at which hopefully you've managed to build up your business skills and become quite self-sufficient in terms of doing your own PR, your own marketing. This is ideal world. But even once you've gotten confident at all these things, there's still going to be that tension of time, right?
Absolutely.
How do you juggle that?
I think the most helpful thing is realizing. Well, I keep all my hours, so I know exactly how long each job took me. But I can also see how many hours I spend on it each day. So I think we were talking before we started about, on average, it's a good day if I've worked 4 hours. That's actually practical, on the bench, unpaid work. And the rest of it is emailing, it's client meetings, it's site visits, it's getting timber, it's like doing social media or doing the website or any of the other things that feed into a business. And especially, if like me, most of my work comes from word of mouth, it's important to actually keep in contact with people and go to events.
Networking events.
And not with the expectation that work is necessarily going to result immediately from an event, but I think if people know you and like you, and they like your work, then you're in their minds.
And they see you out and about, etc. And next time they're looking for a carver, they'll be like, oh yeah, I met this person. And
also that they've had a conversation with you and you're nice to deal with. So, and that sadly, that counts for a lot. If somebody does beautiful work, but they're very difficult to get hold of, or they're difficult to communicate with, then it can make it very difficult to get the work. So I think the best thing for me was realizing that, not feeling like I haven't had a good day's work if I only do that much practical work in those hours. I've beat myself up before and think, God, it should be 6 hours of carving, 8 hours of carving, but realistically then when do you do the admin?
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to sustain long-term working, 12-hour days and just to get 8 hours of, carving. And it's interesting as well because I feel like, if you're someone who is very artistic and is considering this kind of career, most people imagine, I'll be alone in my studio.
It's very romantic.
But also I think it's going to appeal to someone who's probably quite introverted.
Absolutely.
And then they might come to that point of realizing, oh my goodness, I've actually got to get myself to networking events.
It's scary as well. So you've got to turn up to a room full of people you don't know and hope that somebody talks to you, and they always do. But even now, if I'm going along to something and I don't know anyone, it's nerve-wracking. And sometimes you do sit there like a lemon and no one says anything to you, or they don't really want to talk to you because they want to catch up. And that's okay.
But I will say though, I do think, it works. You go to an event, you've got your business cards, have a couple of photos ready on your phone of your work. And I think there's very few people who if you show them what you do, there's very few people who wouldn't have some kind of question or who wouldn't feel engaged right away. You know what I mean?
And I think if you go to something that's an event that you're interested in anyway, and you go with the expectation that you'll have a nice conversation with someone and you don't expect anything else, then you're never going to be disappointed and you'll be really pleasantly surprised when someone remembers you. But I think I'm not someone who finds it easy to go and try and sell myself. So I go along and I have a nice time and I talk to people and I try and find people who I think, this is a really nice person, I would like working with them.
Yeah.
And then if they're interested and they come back, that's lovely.
And also networking with peers, right? Because we've just talked about the fact that a workshop can be quite lonely if you've got your own space you do. So, how much of your time, do you try to make time to, network with peers, and do you have places that you can go to for that, or organisations?
Yeah, so I'm part of the Heritage Crafts Association. That's fantastic. And part of a livery company, so there's other carvers who are part of the joiners and sealers company. But I think obviously I'll catch up with, I have lots of friends who are carvers, so this is a nice way to catch up. But we'll maybe catch up at college events and things. But I think it's also really important to meet other people who are creative or working in crafts, but not your own discipline, because I think otherwise, if we've all trained in the same place and we've all kind of gone into the same industry, it becomes a very narrow field. And it's exciting to talk to people who are bringing really fresh ideas in. So I think that's a really nice thing to do, to meet other craftspeople and to, meet people who are doing maybe more modern crafts and see what kind of exciting stuff is happening. So often if you're in a shared studio space where, like Cockpit or, other spaces where they have a lot of craftspeople or artists, you can have some really exciting ideas come out of that.
Yeah.
In a way that maybe if you're all working on the same kinds of jobs, you're not getting kind of pushed into that innovation.
How do you keep yourself moving forward, innovating, learning?
with great difficulty. Obviously every job you get challenged on, and some of them are very challenging, but you also don't want to be experimenting too much on someone else's pay, and time. Yeah. So I try and do some of my own work in between, and I try and, sometimes if a client is sort of patient or interested, for instance, there was a coat of arms in here last time you visited, and the client then wanted to commission me when I just sort of recently left college, and he wanted to do a small coat of arms, and I said, well, I really want to experiment with a bigger one, so I'm going to charge you less money, and it will take a long time, but I'm just going to have fun with it, and this is how I'm going to learn. And he was happy to kind of go on that journey. And obviously you can't do that every single time, but sometimes you can say, I really like you, I want to do justice to the work, and I want to make something really fun and try new things, and are you happy to be patient with that? And sometimes people are, which is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I really like that. Off camera, we were talking about the pool of London.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Which is, London is, again, full of opportunities for networking. And, as an artist, you've got places like the V&A, etc., to get great inspiration from. But sadly, cost of living in London is just ridiculous, quite frankly.
Yeah, it's painful.
So,
it's really painful.
As an artist, like, how do you balance that, or what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's difficult. I mean, you can definitely have completely successful art careers outside of London, but I think the trade is that in London maybe there are lots of opportunities to go to events, to connect with people, to meet different people, always happening all the time. So you can kind of pick how many you want to take part in. Mm-hmm. So if you're feeling very gregarious, you can be out at things all week, and talking to this person, talking to that person, or there are exhibitions all the time. But obviously it's very expensive. Whereas if you're outside of London, you're somewhere more rural, then it's much cheaper to rent. And also I think the benefit is that there are fewer people you're competing with as well. So people are very excited about finding local artists and wanting to help promote them. And I think there are two routes in. And look, I happen to be based in London anyway, so I was trying to make it work here. But I think it's been helpful being in London and being able to, just on a practical level, if somebody says, I've got a job, can you come and see the site? I can go, yes, I'll come this afternoon, and not have to say, okay, I'm going to have to drive 5 hours and come and visit.
Yeah.
And I think it's not that I wouldn't drive for 5 hours, but I think in people's minds, they'll often say, oh, well, this person's a long way away, I won't commission them. And you think, but that's a frustrating thing, because often those people would travel, and I would travel if I was outside London. Yeah. So I think
maybe their hourly rate might be slightly less.
Absolutely.
And so actually maybe financially it would work out the same for the client, right?
Exactly. So I think, but I think that's sort of more of a sort of a block in the client's mind. So they like the convenience and the fact that it can happen like that. Yeah. At least the first contact. So it's useful in that respect, but the downside is it's just astronomically expensive. Yeah. So finding somewhere to cover your rent at home and then to studio rent on top of that is really difficult.
Yeah, and I should clarify, I said lower hourly rate for someone outside of London. That's very much not based on skill, but based on...
absolutely. It's just...
Because you have to, maybe we can talk a little bit about pricing. You have to consider your own cost of living, but also the cost of your studio, right? That all factors into your hourly rates.
Yeah, and so, for instance, when we were talking earlier about how many hours I will reasonably be working on a paid job each day versus doing administrative stuff, you have to factor in the fact that if you're only having this many hours you can work a day in order to keep everything ticking over, then you end up having to place a higher hourly rate in order to cover that and to cover the rent so it's frustrating sometimes, I think. I mean, we try, and my partner and I try and we always offer a reduced rate to ecclesiastical or charitable or educational institutions, because I think that's the right thing to do. But it's frustrating when you want to give more and maybe not have to charge so much for some projects. That can be difficult, kind of morally, I think. You feel that pull to want to be generous, and you can't always fulfill it just because the ground rent is expensive and food even. God, it's But I get to wake up every day and come and do something I love. So this is the payoff.
For 3 to 4 hours a day.
Exactly. But at least the nice thing about being self-employed is that you you can make up your own hours. If you're enjoying something, you can work more. If you've had a really terrible night's sleep, you can sleep in, and it's okay, because you're managing your own hours, and that's fine. But obviously, you only get paid for the hours you do.
Well,
so
I was going to say the downside is managing your own pipeline of projects, and I'm sure you've probably had some moments in your 10-year career when you thought, okay, I don't know who's going to be paying my studio rent in 6 months' time. I hope someone turns up.
Absolutely. But people always do as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you can have a very quiet period. I mean, I had a really quiet spring, and then everyone wants things from August. So you think, okay, well, it's happened.
That's good.
And to take the quiet times to experiment with stuff more and try and, think about the things that made you feel passionate about carving in the first place.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if you just do something for a job, you lose that.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about the fact that you're a QEST scholar?
Sure.
That's quite exciting.
So QEST, the Queen Elizabeth Scholarship Trust, they do really wonderful work, and they sponsor training in crafts in the UK. So obviously, I think a lot of
that's quite wide-ranging, because I remember looking at their website, and it was everyone from cheesemonger to making hats to sort of really could be someone who's making, I think it was like cricket bats or something like that. Like it's really quite broad, right?
Yeah, and from the very traditional to the very innovative. So they want to keep craft and that craft kind of legacy of craft training continuing through. But it's not necessarily always traditional. So I've actually, the training I'm doing based on their grant is to train in 3D modelling and 3D scanning and 3D CNC, because this is very contentious for woodcarvers. But obviously CNC and things like that have been used a lot in the furniture making and joinery for years. It's a really useful tool, and I think looking at how carving has changed over the last 50, 60 years, we've gone from having these very big workshops, having apprentices and having that lineage of training, to having carvers who mainly work alone or maybe with one or two other people. Very difficult to take apprentices on and be able to, pay them and, train them and dedicate the time to them and make that effective as well.
Yeah.
So
because you're essentially having to take unpaid time off to teach someone, and then, as you say, the speed at which they're working is not gonna. They're not going to be paying for themselves for a long time. So it's just it's a give.
and they're going to make mistakes. I mean, that's inevitable as part of learning. And also, I think the attitude to how you work within a company has changed. So you very rarely have people joining a company and learning skills and wanting to stay there for 40 years. So I think a lot of craftspeople struggle who want to train people, because you want to train someone up and have that also come back into the business and have them feel part of it. But I think a lot of people want to set up their own business. Obviously, they want to. It's all available now. You can be the CEO of your own company or whatever. So that's a challenge. So I think in the past, the business model for a master carver is you would have apprentices in, you would have journeymen, and a lot of the very straightforward kind of, basic work, roughing something out and copying measurements and things, would go to apprentices and journeymen. Now that's not really an option. So I have to say, okay, well, what can I do to speed things up in some areas that will give me more time in other areas? So the idea with, looking into this thing is to think, okay, well, I already draw on a graphics tablet quite regularly, because this means that I can draw straight into the computer, I can make changes very quickly. It's just like pen and paper, but you're drawing onto the screen. And if you make a mistake, you can go backwards.
Your skill set is still the same. Like, you're not going to magically get better at drawing.
The computer doesn't do it for you.
No, but I think that's something that people struggle with. They're like, oh, you're drawing digitally, so you're not really drawing. But it's like, no, if you don't have the draftsmanship, like, it's still not going to happen.
Absolutely.
But it's just, as you say, like, if you make mistakes or things like that, it's just easier to...
So useful.
Yeah, it sort of speeds up that process a little bit.
They want an arm in a different position, it's really easy to move that and redraw over it. But realistically, if instead of modelling in clay, I can model on the computer and then, either print out a small maquette to show a client and then have the roughing out done by a machine in, half the time or a quarter of the time it's going to take an apprentice to do, without any mistakes, ideally, as long as it's been programmed correctly, then that represents a big increase in time. And I don't want to save the time. I want to put the time into something else, to spend longer on the design, longer on the model, longer on the finishing. So
And once you've paid back them, like, you know, once you've paid off the machinery, in a way it could potentially also reduce your hourly rate and potentially make you more affordable in some ways for others, right? It would make the crafts less exclusive in some ways.
Exactly, and you know, look, you still have to do. It's not as if the machine leaves it with a carved. It's not beautiful when it comes out, but you have to do all the hand finishing and sensitive work. But I hope that in the long run, if this works out, then it would give me the ability to take someone on as an apprentice, because there's time saved that I can then spend supervising them while the machine is going, or you know. And again, this is really long term, because it's not as simple as just picking up a pen and learning one program. There are multiple programs you have to work in. They're very complicated, so it's a long term. Having to invest in
yourself and think about the repercussions for your business. But it's interesting, because I think a lot of people, when they hear anything to do with digital, they're worried that it means a loss of skill. But actually for you, it's an increase of skill, because you still have to be an excellent draftsman. You still then have to add all that time learning the technology. So you're not reducing your skill. You're not, you know, I don't think it's a cutting of corners of any type. You still, you know, have to develop yourself in all these ways.
And it shouldn't be. But I think it is also important to stress that, you know, we're at a sort of crossroads where lots of people now have the ability to CNC things out of wood, who have a very imperfect understanding of wood carving, because they've never trained as a carver. So there are a lot of really dodgy bits of ornament out there that are sort of democratized and available to everyone at very cheap prices, but they're really horrible examples. So, you know, realistically, if carvers are going to maintain a high standard of work and you know, disseminate good ornament and good work out, that they have to take this technology on. It's important to keep adapting. Look, if Grinling Gibbons, the famous Baroque woodcarver, could have a CNC machine, and he was a very good businessman, he'd have been all over that. So there's no way that he would have not done that. So
speaking of Grinling Gibbons, that sort of feeds nicely into the V&A project that you did. Do you want to talk a little bit about that cravat?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so this was a really nice project. So this was a collaboration with the V&A, and they have a wonderful series called How Was It Made? And this looks at objects in their collection, which they get craftspeople to remake using all the same techniques. And it just kind of explains how complicated pieces are you know, come to fruition. So they film the process, and you can watch along with it and see all the different stages it goes through. And they've done really beautiful series with all different crafts.
Yeah.
So I made a replica of a piece that's in the V&A that's by Gibbons. So one of his most famous pieces, which is the lace cravat, which is this very kind of delicate looking piece. It was the story goes it was worn by Horace Walpole to a party, and everyone was like, they couldn't believe it was made out of wood. So, you know, there's a lot of exciting tales around Gibbon, but that's a kind of nice one. It shows you the illusion of weightlessness. So that was, they'd already done a 3D scan of the piece. So I worked from a 3D print. I got to handle the original and look at it and take some photographs.
That is incredible.
And that was
getting
lovely.
to handle the original. I mean,
absolutely
that's
lovely.
Lovely, yeah.
Yeah, and really, you know, exciting technically to get to look at a piece, because with carving, even if somebody's been dead for hundreds of years, you can still see a lot of the decisions they've made in the order it's happened through the chisel marks. So
would you say you can learn from them in an indirect way?
Absolutely. So this is, I mean, when you train, you learn from casts or you learn from carvings, because you can see what choices they've made with what chisels, and you can take your chisel and lay it into the groove of the original gouge mark. Obviously, I didn't do that with the Gibbons cravat.
Imagine the outrage if you're like,
No, exactly. That was a really nice experience. So I got to work and make a replica, and obviously, look, the Gibbons is much finer, and I every time I look at it, I wish
very good.
It's okay. I wish I could have a second attempt. Let's put it that way.
Really?
But I think that's, if you see problems with the thing you've made, then it means you've learned something while doing it. So if you come out and think it's perfect, then you're in real trouble.
I like that.
Yeah, that was nice to do, and that was a kind of formative moment for tying in for part of my QEST project. So I'm hoping to explore with 3D scanning how it can be possible to bring, you know, really delicate carvings out of museums that you would not otherwise be able to make a cast of. If you can scan it and make a 3D print, then suddenly all of these really, really exceptional carvings that you would never be able to learn from could be available to students to train.
So not just not just for general public, but actual students of that craft would be able to handle it and put their chisel to it.
Exactly, and not worry about it breaking, and see those decisions, because it's really, really helpful to do that. And unfortunately, you know, the way most wood carvings are, the most delicate ones are pierced or undercut, and that makes it very difficult to make a mould or a cast from it.
Especially Grinling Gibbons, there's a lot of undercutting with his work, right?
Yeah, so it's very hard to learn from them unless you get lucky enough to get to restore one or something like that. You don't get to learn those techniques, so you're learning some basic skills off pieces that are easier to mould, and they can be very beautiful and delicate, but you don't necessarily pick up all of those skills with undercutting or with piercing and the kind of illusions of making things look really light. So I'm hoping, well, fingers crossed, that this works out and this can be an ongoing thing to bring 3D prints to students and help that educational side pick up as well.
That sounds amazing. Yeah,
we'll see.
Maybe you've thought along the way, oh, I wish like this was a thing, you know, like a way of giving extra support or training opportunities, etc. Is there things that you wish you'd seen growing up or developing as a craftsperson?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Okay, I think the first point to make is that obviously I've made an effort, but I've also been very lucky. So I think people always discount luck as part of their success or, you know, their practice, and I think a lot of it is luck. I've happened to meet people at the right time in the right place, and that's been lovely.
Yes, okay, but I would like to also point out that yes, there's a certain amount of luck sometimes in, as you say, right place, right time, but there are still lots of people who might be in the right place, right time, and then don't make the most of it or don't really engage and don't get the most out of it. So, you know, it also takes, you know, the dedication, the perseverance, and,
but I think,
you know.
I think luck is really understated. But I think it's nice to, you know, claim everything's because of what you've done. But actually, I think luck is a huge component. So I'm very happy to hold my hands up and just say I've been lucky. I mean, you put the work in, but but luck aside.
So
luck aside, I think there are some gaps in realizing or being told when you're leaving school that craft is an option. I think I grew up at the sort of tail end of a big kind of campaign to, you know, downgrade apprenticeships and make it seem like working in trades was something you should aspire to not do. You should aspire to work in a university or get a degree, and this sort of taking away of the integrity of being a skilled craftsperson or tradesperson. And I think that's slowly starting to shift now. I really hope it is, because, you know, if you train as an electrician, you have to, it's really hard. You have to know a lot of stuff and do a lot of complicated sums, and it's not an easy trade. So I think there's that. I wish that there'd been a little bit more adventurousness with the options available as students. So part of what I do with the joiners and sealers is take part in something called the Livery Schools Link, which is fantastic. We get lots of primary and secondary school students coming around, lots of livery companies take part, and we show them all these different trades that they can do and say, these are your options. You know, you don't have to just go into a desk job. And most of them, you know, maybe they're not all going to be interested, but some people are, and I think just knowing that is an option, and it's, you know, you're not going to own a Ferrari, but you're going to enjoy what you do. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is there's the gap of knowing you can do it as a career, which means that most carvers tend to come and train later in life after a first career or first degree or something like that. And then the second one is, like we were talking about, this sort of period after leaving college but before you get off the ground. And I think the first 5 years are really, really hard, really hard. And I think unless, you know, unless there's more support in that area, and I think Cockpit Arts is really, really good for that. If you have a trade, say, as a joiner, it's very easy to fall back on that work that you know you're going to get paid for, and the carving becomes a kind of small part of that. And I think we lose a lot of carvers every year because it's really hard to do. You know, you're slower than professional carvers. If you're living in a city, it's very expensive, and I would like to see a little bit more support in that area, because I think actually there's loads of support for training. That's fantastic. We've got a really good grant system. We've got lots of people who want to fund that. But I think there are people who do that training and then get lost afterwards. And then the investment in them doesn't pay off because they haven't got them off the ground. And I think Cockpit is great for that, for providing that kind of transitional support. But,
because it's, I think, from what you were saying, the support that they offer is like very practical, business oriented.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very sort of like tangible. Okay, like this is actually how you're going to start your your practice from a business point of view.
Yeah, and everything from SEO to doing your taxes to if you want to get here, what are the 10 steps you have to take to get there? How do you talk to people? How do you all of these parts of learning to run a business that you realistically don't have time or capacity or the opportunity to learn when you're studying, but these are the bits that will make you stay in business. And if you don't if there's no resources to support people to learn that, it's really, really hard. I think the Craft Council do some of this stuff, and they have a lot of guides on their website which are really helpful. I would like to see maybe one-off investments from, say, the government to say, okay, well, we're going to do something, hopefully it's not a shifting target like social media. Obviously it's constantly evolving, it's a bit frustrating, but how to set up your website, how to do your taxes, aimed at craftspeople, a one-off video recording, and that can be a resource that's available there in perpetuity, and it's realistically a low cost, and there are people who are happy to do some of these talks pro bono. Talk about intellectual property law, really complicated and really important if you're a craftsperson, and most craftspeople don't know about it.
Especially with AI.
Exactly, but most craftspeople don't know that they have the copyright. They think if they sell an object, then the person who they've sold it to owns the copyright, and they don't. You can, if they make reproductions of it and you haven't agreed to it, then they're in breach of copyright, and you should be paid for that. So. There's lots of things that, unless someone tells you, it's very complicated. But realistically, if there was a recording of someone explaining this stuff, it would only need to be explained once. So I think at that point, there's just the building of awareness and knowing, telling, colleges and places where people train that there are resources they can access, and they're here, and they're here for you. And I think that gap is a little bit difficult at the moment, and not for lack of trying, I don't think. But it's,
and I think that's something that I'm trying to address through these videos, and also on my website. There's a section on there where I'm putting, as I come across all these resources, I'm sort of collating them in there to
such a brilliant thing to do.
Make sure, thank you. But because I'm just so aware that it's not easy, to come across these things, and often you find out about them after the fact, after you've kind of gone past the point of needing them, and it can be so frustrating when you think, oh gosh, it was there all along, and it was just in some obscure part of the internet or whatever.
No, I think that's really valuable, and I think it's also important for people who are makers to not sort of pretend it all just comes from nowhere. It's hard. It's really hard, and you only ever see the successes on people's websites and social media, and not very many people want to post about things breaking or clients being difficult, and that makes it very hard, I think, to get a sense of what the struggle is.
And as you say, there's lots of people who kind of drop off, and it's not for lack of talent, it's probably for lack of know-how at the things around their practice, which is a real shame. We've talked about the reduced number of apprenticeships, and we've talked about leveraging technology. We've sort of, tried to think about, what resources there are for people and opportunities. What does the future of crafts look like for you?
I think the future of craft, worldwide actually looks relatively good. I think people are recognising its value more, and I think it's interesting in the UK because worldwide we've got quite a polarised political system, but I think regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, you can be really proud that there's a legacy of handcraft in your country that's highly skilled. That's not a politicised thing. It's something that people have been doing and passing on, and doing it respectfully and thoughtfully for years. So I think that's sort of being recognised a bit more. And I think recently there were talks about trying to echo some of the decisions that places like Japan have made, and trying to protect these assets as intangible cultural heritage. And
like living treasures.
Exactly, and I think those things, you know, they can seem like just a title, but I think that's really important because, you know, unless people can understand the value of a practical craft and they can understand art, but I think there's this funny divide where people in the past have separated craft and art out and devalued one, and it's a very valuable part of our history. And for everyone all the way across the world, I mean, human beings like making things.
Yeah.
And I think the more people recognise that, and the more that this whole kind of dying craft label disappears. I mean, the Heritage Crafts Association has done some really fantastic work identifying the actual dying crafts, so things like gold beating or glass eyeball making.
Yeah, no,
wood carving is not one of them.
Yeah.
And the number of people say, I'm really pleased to meet you because I just didn't think anyone did this anymore. It's a dying craft. And I think, no, it's really healthy. It's changed. It's changed over the years. It's very different from how it was 60 years ago. But it's really active, and I think that labelling something a dying craft means that people think no one does it, so they don't look to commission anything. And once you get past that, and people say, "Oh, fantastic, it's still happening." You know, the same thing saying, "Oh, people don't expect women are in carving." I said, no, there's lots of us. There's lots of women every single year when people are training. It's about 50-50, sometimes more women than men. You know, and people are very surprised by this. They think you have to have kind of enormous muscles, or I don't know. You know, and I think breaking these stereotypes, dying craft, there's some kind of, I don't know, male chauvinism, or you know, the people are doing this, and they're doing it from all walks of life, and it's great. You know, and I think when you remove those barriers, then people, they want to commission the work, they're excited about it, and that the greater awareness really just helps keep it alive. So
I think you're right. The perception of crafts is really important, and you know, you talk about Japan. I'm French, so I always refer back to France, but you know, the way that crafts are viewed in France and the sort of status they have, you know, I feel like here, if you say like, oh, I left school early to do a practical training, people are sort of like, oh, you know, whereas in France, if you leave school after your like your equivalent of GCSEs because you wanted to like become a baker or, you know, people really respect that.
Well, they should.
You know, they see that as
that.
like, oh, right, so that means you're someone who's creative and entrepreneurial
and passionate,
and passionate, etc. And I think it has, and you know, and basically because people know there's going to be that respect, in a way, it's sort of, you know, it encourages you to go down that route. Which is really fantastic. Whereas I think you're right, in this country, we've kind of lost track of that a little bit.
I think we've had a really difficult time where, people haven't had it hasn't had the status, you know, if you're a tradesperson or craftsperson, it hasn't had the status that other professions would. And what, you know, like you say, if somebody leaves school early to become a baker, it's seen as them sort of dropping out rather than pursuing something that's really passionate and meaningful. And to be honest, why stay in school for the extra years doing something you're not interested in? You're wasting really good, useful years of your life where you could be very focused and very, you know, intent and learn a lot of things about, you know, the thing you want to do. I mean, Christ, I wish people had found me when I was 8 and kind of got me carving instead of...
Especially when you think about, you know, again, you talked about the amount of time it takes to get trained up.
Yeah, a really long time.
And, you know, we talk about the cost of living and how hard it is to get on the housing ladder. Yeah. The earlier you start, the better, because the younger you start, the quicker you're going to start earning. Yeah. So, you know, really it's in everybody's interest to get people started on that. It just...
And obviously, you don't want to start so early that you're losing out on, you know, mathematics or literacy, or you know, you don't want to lose valuable things. But I think there are still, you know, apprenticeships, you know, often incorporate, you know, maths and writing, and it's not that you're abandoning those skills, but that you're, you know, you can focus if you know what you want to do and you love doing that thing. Then, you know, we should try and facilitate people to do it. It's never too late to retrain. I think this is. You know, this is the other thing that I see a lot is people who've come to craft later in life, having done different careers and been frustrated with them. And I think a lot of people worry about making that shift. And like you've talked about this as well, you know, in your life and your husband's, and you know, being brave enough to retrain and go in a different direction. Actually, that is really well supported in the UK. We have organisations like QEST that will support that, and that's really brilliant, and that's something to celebrate. So
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned my husband. There's definitely lots of things that you've said throughout this interview where I thought that really resonates with what I know his journey has been and experiences that he's had. So going back to the sort of design aspect of your practice, what are things that come up a lot in commissions, maybe like a common thread? And then also what would be commissions that you'd like to get in future, something that you've never done that you'd love to work on?
So let's think. Things that come up often. I think the things that come up often are, I guess, tying back into, the public perception of craft is realizing what you can have. And it sounds silly, but it's a big issue, is trying to explain to people, essentially, obviously I trained as a carver, but essentially I'm a sculptor. So sometimes people will approach me having only met me doing gilding work and won't realize that I do the sculpture. And sometimes people will say, I want a wood carving, and they don't realize they can have it in bronze, or they could have it gilded, they could have it painted, they could have it carved in stone, and suddenly...
So you're having to educate your clients a little bit.
And obviously look up, it's a complicated subject, so it's, you're not going to come in as an expert knowing everything, but I think it's nice to open up other options and show what is possible. And yeah, I guess the commission I would like to do, I think something where it would be nice to do some statuary, because I think you don't do a lot, wooden statuary doesn't come up a lot, and it would be nice to do it for a client who is happy for it to take a long time and to really push the boat out. And I think obviously that makes it expensive, so if we're talking ideal commissions here, but I think it's all of the works of art that we admire the most are ones that took people years and years to do sometimes, and in order to make something you feel really, really proud of, you have to spend the extra time. And I think we're so used to things happening quickly as a culture that it's very difficult to give someone that leeway and not start worrying that they've run off with the money. Or
it brings to mind Grinling Gibbons' work at Petworth, for example. Like that's, I don't know how long that took, and obviously had a team to help him, but that's definitely not the kind of thing that he would have done in a week. So
no, exactly. But then also, in some ways, Gibbons is an interesting example, because there are pieces like the cravat or some of the more complicated pieces, beautiful carving with these musical instruments and the sheet music. And there's some things he obviously did as a real kind of making a masterpiece, showing off.
Yes.
And there's other pieces
celebrating his skill.
Yeah. And there's other pieces that are still incredibly beautiful, but that was very much in the scope of what he did day to day. And they're complicated in the ways they're constructed, and but they've been broken down to be made by multiple people, up to 50 people in the workshop, all carving different pieces and having them fit together. So you can see the places where he's really pushed at the edges of his skill. And I think, it's not always something we get the opportunity to do as artists. So you people who come to commission, you see the work you've already done, and that's what they want, because that's what they can see. And I think it's very hard to take someone on a journey where you're getting them to imagine what could be without showing them.
And so what would be, because I'm sure that people have lots of questions when they first approach you for potential commission, and you've said as well that there's a little bit of having to show them what you can do, etc. What is something, if we have someone watching right now who is potentially interested, but knows, they've watched up to this point, but they're sort of, what would be something that you think would be helpful for them to know already? Is it maybe to do with timescale, or with pricing, or with, whatever,
I think, I think to realise that carving takes time, that's a big one. You're talking months or weeks or months, depending on the scale, rather than days. So it's not a quick process. And obviously, if it's not a quick process, it is more expensive. But the idea with any carving, stone and wood carving, is that you're not making a quick piece of art. You're making, let's take heraldry as an example. You're making something that you're going to be passing down to your children, and they're going to pass down to their grandchildren. And the idea is that in 300 years, that piece is still going to exist, and it's going to have a lineage and tradition as part of your family. And I think if you start looking at it on the long-term scale, that makes a lot more sense than thinking you just want something to decorate the hallway. You know, people can go to IKEA and buy something to decorate the hallway, but that thing is unlikely to still be decorating a hallway 200 years from now.
Yeah.
So I think that's the sort of viewpoint to take with carving, is to try and think, where do I want this to end up beyond me?
Yes.
And I think that gives a different sense of the value of it, basically. And when you're making original work, obviously depends on how happy the client is with the first design, but often you'll go through one or two different variations. And if it's a big, complicated piece, then you're going to be making a model. If it's the model that you're going to have to work from for 6 months, 8 months, you don't really want to make it in clay, or if you make it in clay, you're going to want to make a mold of it and take a cast so that the clay isn't, clay it gets moss on it, it goes moldy, it cracks, it dries out. So there are things that make it longer, and often I think, if price is a factor, you can have the same thing modelled and you can stop at the model stage and have a cast made of that model, and you don't necessarily have to take it into the stone or wood and add the extra step and the extra cost. So there are lots of ways to kind of fit within people's budgets.
You also do teaching. We haven't even touched on that.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a great way for people to, if maybe they want to experience what the process is like.
Absolutely.
Do you want to say a little bit more? So you have teaching days where people can actually come in and try their hand at what you do, right?
Yeah. So I run courses here, so it's nice and central and easy for people to get to, and generally just to try and give them a taste of what it's like carving, because I think often the options for wood carving, it's very popular as a craft, so often the courses are booked out, or maybe you have to sign up for a lot of them, and if you don't like working with timber, you're not going to enjoy carving. And I've tried working with glass, for instance, and I love the results, but I hate working with glass. It feels horrible, and some people just don't mesh with the timber. They don't like some of the qualities that other people love. So I think it's nice to get a sense of what you can do and how long it takes and what tools you need, and have some instruction and see whether you just like the physical process of a gouge cutting into the wood, because that's the thing that's going to carry you through. If you don't like how it feels, you're never going to get past the bits where you feel frustrated with not being able to make what you quite want.
Right.
Whereas if you're still enjoying the process, then it doesn't matter if it doesn't come out quite how you wanted, because it's pleasant to do. So hopefully just give people a taster, and there's sometimes longer courses if people are interested in doing, a more in-depth kind of dive.
Is it a small group, or do you also do one-on-one teaching?
Sometimes do one-on-one, but generally a small group, somewhere between, generally no more than about 6 people. Yeah. So enough time to get round everyone and make sure that no one's sort of getting forgotten, which is, you need. When you're first starting, you need someone to say, you need to hold it differently, you need to use the mallet differently, or approach it from this direction. Yeah,
because a lot of it is that muscle memory and sort of feeling your way to the material, isn't it?
And feeling what the material is doing through the end of the chisel. And I think some of that's just practice, but ideally the courses are set up so that if you really like doing it, you can buy 1 or 2 chisels and you can do a lot at home, and then when you know more, you can come back and do some more advanced stuff. But I think for me, when I teach, I want to have people enjoy it and want to try it at home, and not set it up and say, yes, you can come along and you're going to get 20 chisels, but that's going to cost you hundreds of pounds to do it at home. Make it so that people can actually take it up as a craft, because otherwise it does get prohibitively expensive if you have to buy hundreds of chisels.
So you're trying to make it approachable.
Yeah, because otherwise people aren't going to train and, join as carvers.
Yeah.
They have to enjoy it.
You've got this really exciting project coming up. I don't actually know anything about what it is, the timeline. So go on.
Okay, so a year or 2 ago, I was approached by a publisher called Crowwood Press, and they publish a variety of different titles, but they have a focus on craft as well, and they asked me if I'd like to write a book on ornamental wood carving. So yeah, I guess I can consider this me trying to pay forward the things I wish I'd known when I was training. So obviously there are some things that you can't learn from a book. It's very difficult to correct someone's kind of technique from a book. But everything that I can write about that you can learn from a book, I've tried to include there, so that if you want to learn about timber technology or buying timber, or you want to learn about ornament and understand some of the basics, the history of ornament, or look at how chisels are coded, the different manufacturers, how you sharpen them, and go through all of that in lots of detail and have that as a kind of reference book. And obviously that's going to supplement people's practice, and ideally supplement practice where you have taken some training, just because it helps having a master carver actually look at what you're doing.
Yeah, totally.
But ideally that will act as a reference for people who are studying, and it's collate all of that information into one place. So that was me wanting to give back, basically.
And was there nothing similar out there before, or maybe there was, but it was like, it had been written a long time ago? And
there are a number of different books. There is a really fantastic one that was, but it was, again, like you said, much older, and I think more kind of towards carving as part of furniture rather than sculptural carving. And there are some other books which go into some depth about some details, but then they don't cover other ones. So I think something I don't see a lot of at all is measuring and transcribing measurements from a model accurately. So having made the model, if you just copy it by eye, it's going to go wrong. And I think there are lots of different ways you can approach measuring in a very systematic way. And I think especially if you're someone who isn't particularly confident about your ability to see things, part of learning is to make a decision and then double check it by measuring off the model that you've made. And sometimes it will be right and sometimes it will be wrong, and that helps give you feedback on when your judgment's correct. And I think it
hones your judgment, right,
absolutely.
over time.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really important part of the craft. And especially if you're doing restoration work or you want to get into restoration work, you need to know how to copy things exactly. And you don't always have to do that. I mean, a lot of carving you would copy the big shapes and then you'll be a bit more free towards the end. But I think it's important to pull all of those details into one place. So I've tried to go into as much depth as possible. I'm sure there's going to be things that people wish I'd added more of, but it's the things
future editions.
Future editions. It's the things that I wish that I had reference books and instruction on more.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds, it sounds like you sort of looked at the existing bibliography and basically was like, okay, here are the gaps that need filling.
Absolutely.
Which is really great. Well, that's really exciting.
Oh,
and,
thank you.
Yeah, well done you. I mean, for balancing so much behind the scenes, carrying on with your work and, writing a book alongside it. So that's really incredible. And I hope that it all goes well with the launch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
It's just been great to be able to really delve into everything in detail and talk about your career so far. And it sounds like there's a lot more exciting things to come.
Hopefully, till I'm old and grey. That's the idea.
Clunie's book, Woodcarving, is now out. Such exciting news. Huge congratulations to Clunie on this amazing achievement. The book is published by the Crowwood Press, so I have popped a link to their website in the description of this video in case you'd like to purchase a copy. Thank you for watching. It means a lot, especially as at the moment, this channel is entirely self-funded. So please spread the word and subscribe. See you next week.
The surprise book.
I love it. You're like, oh yeah, by the way,